Good day. Today, we will tackle about effect, extinction, and breach of obligations. First is the obligations with penal clause, Article 1226 to 1230. An obligation with a penal clause is an obligation where a penalty is stipulated as a substitute for damages in the event of non-performance, delayed performance, or defective performance of the principal obligation. This type of obligation serves several purposes. First is to ensure compliance with the principal obligation by attaching a consequence for breach. Second is to liquidate damages in advance, saving parties from proving the actual damages incurred in case of breach. Third is to serve as a punishment for non-compliance intended to deter the obligor from breaching the obligation. We also have the characteristics of an obligation with penal clause. We have three. First is accessory obligation. The penal clause is always an accessory to the principal obligation. This means that without the principal obligation, the penal clause cannot exist independently. Second is the liquidated damages. The penalty in such obligations is typically predetermined and serves as liquidate damages, avoiding the need for the creditor to prove actual damages. Third is we have the substitutive penalty. The penalty can either replace or supplement the right to claim actual damages, depending on the agreement of the parties or the law's provision. And then we have also the types of penal clauses. We have three types of penal clauses. First is as a substitute for damages, where the penalty replaces actual damages. Second is the cumulative with damages, where the creditor may collect both the penalty and actual damages, often in cases where actual damages exceed the stipulated penalty. Third is we have the exclusive penalty, where only the penalty and no additional damages may be claimed unless there is fraud or gross negligence. Example of this is Jee Ann is renting an apartment. In her rental agreement, there is a penal clause that says if Jee Ann do not pay the rent on time, she will have to pay an extra fee of 100 pesos for each day the rent is late. So, the penal clause is a crucial element in obligations, ensuring that parties adhere to their commitments while providing a clear framework for recourse in the event of a breach. It balances the interests of both creditors and debtors, promoting fairness and accountability in contractual relationships.
Modes of extinguishing obligations. Payment or performance in the context of obligations, particularly under Articles 1231 to 1251 of the Civil Code. Payment or performance is the key mode of extinguishing obligations. Here is a breakdown of what constitutes valid payment or performance and who is involved in the process. First, we have complete fulfillment. The debtor must fulfill the entire obligation as specified in the contract. For example, if the contract obligation is to pay 1,000 pesos, the debtor must pay the full amount. Second, proper subject matter. The payment must be made in the form agreed upon. If the obligation is to deliver goods, the correct goods must be delivered. And lastly, timeliness. Payment or performance must be made on or before the due date specified in the contract. Late payments may incur penalties. Modes of extinguishing obligations, payment or performance. Capacity of the debtor. The debtor must have the legal capacity to perform the obligation. For instance, minors may not be able to enter into binding contracts. Second, proper place. Payment should be made at the location specified in the contract. If the contract states a specific place for payment, it must be honored. And lastly, notification. The creditor should be informed of the payment or performance to ensure that they acknowledge the fulfillment of the obligation.
Good day, my name is Norayma, and today I will tackle the modes of extinguishing obligations, payment, or performance. Who should to pay and to whom? Who should pay? The debtor is the individual or entity that is obligated to fulfill the obligation. This could be a person or a business that has agreed to pay debt, deliver goods, or provide service. To whom? The payment or performance should be made to the creditor, who is the individual or entity entitled to receive the payment or performance. The creditor has the right to demand fulfillment of the obligation. Subrogation. If a third party pays the debts on behalf of the debtor, the third party may have the right to seek reimbursement from the debtor. This is known as subrogation. Joint obligations. In this case of joint obligations, each debtor is responsible for their share of the obligation. The creditor can demand payment from any one of the debtors for the full amount. But the debtor who pays can seek contribution from the others. The conclusion. Valid payments or performance of an obligation requires complete fulfillment, proper subject matter, timeliness, capacity, proper place, and notification. The debtor is responsible for making payments or performing the obligation, and it must be done to the creditor, who is entitled to receive it. Understanding the principles is essential for ensuring that obligations are properly extinguished under the law.
Laws of the thing due. Articles 1262 to 1269. In the context of obligations under Philippine civil law, the loss of the thing due refers to the situation where the specific object of the obligation is lost or destroyed. Articles 1262 to 1269 of the Civil Code address the circumstances under which a debtor may be relieved from their obligation due to loss of the thing due. When is the debtor relieved from obligation? First is loss of the thing due. A debtor is relieved from the obligation when the specific thing that is the subject of the obligation is lost or destroyed. This loss must be without the fault of the debtor. For example, if a debtor is obligated to deliver a specific car and that car is stolen without the debtor's negligence, the debtor may be relieved from the obligation to deliver that car. Second is types of loss. First, total loss. If the thing is completely lost or destroyed, the debtor is generally relieved from the obligation. Partial loss. If only part of the thing is lost, the debtor may still be required to perform the obligation, but the performance may be adjusted based on the loss. Third is without fault of the debtor. The debtor is only relieved from the obligation if the loss occurs without their fault. If the debtor is negligent or has caused the loss, they may still be held liable for their obligation. Fourth is specific versus generic things. If the obligation pertains to a specific thing, a unique item, the debtor is relieved from the obligation if the specific thing is lost. However, if the obligation is for a generic thing, like a certain quantity of goods, the debtor may still be required to provide a substitute of the same kind and quantity. And the fifth is expectation. There are expectations where the debtor may still be liable even if the thing is lost, such as in cases of fraud or gross negligence. If the debtor act in a bad faith or failed to take reasonable care of the thing, they may still be held responsible. Conclusion. A debtor is relieved from the obligation when the specific thing due is lost or destroyed without their fault. The nature of the loss is total or partial. The type of thing is specific or generic, and the debtor's conduct in a relation to the loss are all important factors in determining whether the debtor is relieved from their obligation. Understanding these principles helps to clarify the responsibilities of debtors in the event of loss.
Condonations or remissions of debt. Articles 1270 to 1274. Condonations or remissions of debt refers to the voluntary forgiveness of an obligations by the creditor. This means that the creditor decides to cancel or forgive the debt owed by the debtor, relieving the debtor from the obligations to pay. What is condonations? Condonations is the act of a creditor voluntarily forgiving a debt, which results in the extinguishment of the obligations. It is a unilateral act, meaning it is done by the creditor without requiring the debtor's consent. Requirements for condonations. First is the voluntary act. The creditor must willingly decide to forgive the debt. This act should not be coerced or forced. Second is expressed or implied. Condonations can be expressed clearly, for example, through a written document stating the debt is forgiven, or implied through the creditor's actions, examples, not demanding for payment. Third is the capacity of the creditor. The creditor must have the legal capacity to forgive the debt. If the creditor is not of sound mind or is a minor, the remissions may not be valid. Effects and limitations of condonations. First is effect of condonations. Once a debt is forgiven, the debtor no longer has to pay the amount condoned. The debt is completely erased and the debtor is free from any further responsibilities for that amount. For example, if John owes 5,000 to his friend Mark and Mark decides to forgive the entire debt, John no longer has to pay anything. The debt is completely erased and John is free from any obligations to repay Mark. Second is partial condonations. A creditor can forgive only part of the debt while still requiring the debtor to pay the rest. For example, if someone owes 10,000 pesos and the creditor forgives only 4,000 pesos, the debtor still has to pay 6,000 pesos. Then third is the limitations of condonations. Illegal debts cannot be condoned. Examples, debts from illegal activities. Examples, if the creditor transfers the debt to someone else, a third party, they cannot forgive it unless the new owner of the debt agrees. So in short, condonations wipe out a debt fully or partially, but it cannot apply to illegal debts or those already assigned to someone else. In conclusion, condonations or remissions of debt is a legal act where a creditor voluntarily forgives a debt, resulting in the extinguishment of the obligations. It can be expressed or implied and can apply to the entire debt or just a portion of it. Understanding the principles of condonations helps clarify the rights and responsibilities of both creditors and debtors in the financial agreements.